Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our wonderful webinar tonight regarding the Cape Florida banding station. My name is Paola Ferreira. I am the Executive Director of Tropical Audubon Society, and we are very excited to share with you all about Cape Florida banding station and the marvelous journey of migration that Michelle is going to take us through. Next slide, please, Michelle. So we have some little housekeeping rules here for you to look. All of you are on listen only mode. So please use the Q&A function to post questions to the presenter, and your questions will be answered at the end of the webinar, but please feel free to add any questions in the process. We are recording the webinar, so you are aware, and we will make it available tomorrow. So first of all, I want to introduce our wonderful panelists. So first we have Michelle Davis, who's here on the screen. So Michelle received a BA in Art and Scientific Illustration for the University of California, Santa Cruz. And in 2018, she earned a Master in Science in Environmental Policy and Management from FIU. So Michelle has a long life passion for birds, and that led to a decade of seasonal field work focusing primarily on migratory songbirds. She moved to Miami in 2000 to work with the endangered Cape seaside sparrow in Everglades National Park. And out of her enthusiasm and love for songbirds and all things birds, in 2002, she helped found the Cape Florida banding station to monitor fall songbirds migration on Key Biscayne. She's been doing this incredibly for 20 years, and Tropical Audubon Society is extremely proud and lucky to have her now manage the Cape Florida banding station with the goal to expand the reach of the station's community science program. So thank you so much, Michelle, for all you do for us, and we're very lucky to have you here. And secondly, we have Brian Rapoza. So I bet most of you know Brian. Brian is a Tropical Audubon Society field trip coordinator, member very active of the conservation committee of the organization, leading in numerous bird conservation projects, and very importantly for me, a wonderful board member. In his role, he leads birding field trips through Florida, the US, and the neotropics. So check it out. You might want to join Brian on those field trips. And before that, he was an environmental science teacher, outreach specialist, and internship coordinator at MAST. And I understand he won the prize for the best teacher at MAST, which I completely can relate to that. So he's also the author of Birding Florida, a bird finding guide of more than 200 locations throughout the state. So certainly we are in excellent hands. Michelle is going to take us through an amazing presentation, and then Brian and her will have a very interesting conversation followed by your questions that you please add in the Q&A. Great, so that's it from my side, and I'm going to hand it over to Michelle to continue with the webinar.
Okay, so I'm talking about, as already said, our bird banding station. That's at Bill Baggs Cape Florida State Park that we've had for 20 years. Bill Baggs Cape Florida State Park, in case you don't know, it is on a barrier island off the coast of Miami, and it's right here. This yellow area is the park, and as you can see from the satellite view, it is an oasis of green, also along with Brandon. It's one of the more substantial green areas in all this metropolitan area. So it's very important for migrating birds. The park's originally was in the 80s was Australian pine monoculture. It's a tree that's been planted a lot around South Florida it grows fast, provides shade. Back before, and it kind of takes over. As you can tell that that was the only species of tree growing in the park at that time, but it did provide shade. They do have a really pretty, the wind blowing through. They have this kind of light canopy that the wind blows through and sounds really pretty. So people kind of like them, but ecologically it's a desert because the needles fall off these trees and they suppressed growth underneath. So what you end up is with tall trees of one species with nothing underneath them. And this is how it was in the late 80s and early 90s. This is what it looked like out there. On August 24, 1992, this large hurricane came, and this is a Category 5. It was very devastating, and Cape Florida was in the very top, just out of the main eye wall, and it completely destroyed the Australian pine forest. The trees are very susceptible to snapping. Also, the surge kind of overwashed, and it provided the park with a chance to start over. So this lower picture, they're cleaning up the mess, all these shattered trees. And they actually scraped down to the dirt practically and had pretty much a brand new start, a clean slate and they wanted to restore the park with native vegetation, uses the destruction of the storm as an opportunity for kind of like a rebirth. So the first thing they did is they restored the topography of the park, which topography by Florida terms, very subtle changes in elevation make for different plant communities. They made kind of some more intricate inlets for the mangrove forest. They made dune habitat. They made hammock habitat. And then the next project was planting everything. And they planted everything by hand. They went around all the nurseries. They researched what was native vegetation occurred beforehand. And they found as much as they could from local nurseries and just volunteers. Liz Golden, who's a park biologist to this day, had a lot to do with this, but volunteers hand planted all of these natives, and they were just small little seedlings like this. This started about 1994, and then so they're trying to recreate these habitats, like mangrove habitat, hammock habitat. There's some ponds back there. There's dune habitat. So they're basically recreating from scratch, and this is when it was first planted. And this is what it looked like today. It's just got a lot more diversity compared to that's what it started like. So yeah, it's a big difference. It was a lot of work, and then the plants have been growing for years, and then they've recruited, sprouted new ones. And so this is what it looks like now. It's got a lot of different nooks and crannies for different species of birds, different levels of vegetation, different types of trees. They call it environmental niches. Some birds like to forage low, some birds forage high. There's different fruits, different insects. It's just a more complex habitat now, and it supports a lot more birds. Now, I don't have any before data, but the after data is showing that the restored habitat is it's a good place for birds. So I came down here in 2000, and I'd done a lot of migration work up in on the Gulf Coast. I worked with one of the big names in migration studies, Dr. Frank Moore at University of Southern Mississippi. I was a field tech for him. I fell in love with the drama of bird migration. So when I came down here, one of the first things I wanted to do was, we need a banding station in South Florida. So we started small with me and 10 nets underneath the tarp and some friends coming to hang out at a table and it took a while to get going, because to ban birds like this, to run a station and to catch wild native birds, you need a lot of permits. You need federal permits, I need state permits, and I also need permits for the park that I'm working in. So it's 3 levels of permitting, and they're easy to renew, but getting them in the first place takes a long time. It probably took me about 8 or 9 months from when I started trying to get the permits to when I was permitted and was able to open up in October of 2002. So basically what we do at the banding station is we have an array of nets set up through the hardwood hammock, and the birds don't see the mesh. It's very fine mesh, and they're set up in the shade with vegetation on either side, so birds flying through don't see them and get caught. We check them about every 20 minutes, and when we come across a bird, we gently remove them from the net, but taking them out of the net, there's an art to it. We That's why there's a whole lot of training involved for people who are interested in volunteering. We can't just have people show up for one day and just expect to be able to do this and help. I train people, depends on how busy it is, how long their training is, but they first learn to hold birds, and then they watch those of us that are experienced take them out so they understand the methods to use, and then they start doing it on their own under supervision. And so it's a process. It takes about, one field season, 2 to 3 months of somebody, going at least one morning a week to learn how to do this. And that's just, for the safety of the birds. We don't want to hurt the birds. We do everything we can to expedite this. We don't. So once we take the birds out of the net, each bird goes into its own bag. And once it's in the bag, it's not looking at anything. They stay calm. We bring the bags back to the banding tent. This is a pretty busy day. So the bags are arranged by net, and they're also arranged in the order they come in so that the birds, the first guys in are the first guys to get handled. And then there's a whole process for each bird. It takes about 5 minutes total. But the first thing we do is we put an aluminum U.S. Fish and Wildlife band with a unique number. These bands are issued by the government, and they're free as long as I'm a licensed bander. But I have to submit the data. You want to submit the data back to a national database. The bands are sized for the birds. I probably have like eight sizes maybe. Most usually, like for small birds, I've got 5 sizes that we use on a regular basis. They get attached to the leg. They're like a bracelet. They're attached with a special set of pliers that we have. And then while we have the bird in the hand, you determine the species, the age, and the sex. There's plumage clues for most of these, sometimes wing measurement. Like one little detail, like this patch of feathers lets me know that is a young painted bunting that was born that summer. So we have a whole big fat book that's like our Bible of information about how we, everything we need to know to tell, close species apart and the different ages and sexes. Then we take some measurements of the wing length, and then we weigh the bird. The last thing we do is we weigh the bird, record the weight, and then we let the bird go. And the bird, that can take 3 to 5 minutes per bird most of the time. And that gives us information on the health of the bird. We get health information, the condition of the bird for carrying on migration. We get age information. Sometimes we get, I'm getting ahead of myself. So over the nearly 20 years, we've been open every single fall. We had a half season in 2017 and 2002. But we've caught 33,167 birds of 114 species in the fall. In spring, we have, we've only been open 6 springs for a variety of reasons. One of the things we're trying to do now with our collaboration with Tropical Audubon is to be open regularly in the spring and start building a spring data set. It's rare to have a long-term data set like this. A 20-year data set is really valuable because you can look at long-term changes. So our spring data set, we have 6,664 birds of 57 species that we've caught. And our #1 capture is black-throated blue warbler, followed by ovenbird and American redstart. You can see these 3 species make up almost half of what we catch. But that's pretty normal for a banding station. Banding stations usually have a few like top 5 species. And then you kind of like all the extra stuff that's in other species because it's like, wow, something different. So our top 10 species, I said black-throated blue warbler, we banded 5,961, and we usually catch around 300 per year. This is our #1. That's a female in front and a male in the back. It's the most sexually dimorphic warbler we have. Females and males don't look at all like each other. Second is ovenbird. Third place is redstart, and the 3 of those species kind of trade place of which goes the top one year or the other. Sometimes redstart comes out on top, sometimes ovenbird. It's always one of those three. Our first non-warbler, gray catbirds, are I think fourth most captured bird. And the fifth is black and white warbler. Sixth most common is worm-eating warbler. Common yellowthroat is seventh. Northern water thrush is our eighth most common capture. And northern parula is our ninth. And these top warbler species have all in common that they're spending the winter most of them spend the winter on the Caribbean islands. Also, a lot of them spend the winter. You probably know a lot of them from the Christmas bird counts because a lot of them just stay in Florida for the winter. But the bulk of them continue on to the islands like the Greater Antilles. The red-eyed vireo rounds out our top 10. It's maybe the exception to the rule. These guys go all the way through. They're going to like the northern Amazon basin, northern South America. They have very long wings. They have one of the longer migrations of the birds that we catch. And we catch about 50 a year. One of the things we find out through banding is how long birds live. It's surprising how long they live for being such small animals. Our record is a northern cardinal that was 12 years old. This boy and this cardinal were both born in 2005. We watched them kind of grow up together. That was the last year, I think 2017. That was the last year we saw that cardinal. But we kind of hope he's still alive and he just kind of is net savvy. We've had an 8-year-old gray catbird, an 8-year-old ovenbird, and a small little American redstart, 7 years old. That's a lot of migrations that individual is surviving. So migration. It's most of the birds we catch are migrants. The cardinals are residents. We're set up as a migration station. We're only open in the spring and the fall. The birds are migrating at night. And that picture in the background is us kind of watching the morning flight. As the sun rises there, you can hear them calling and they're kind of deciding where they want to stay for the day. They won't set out across the ocean at daylight. What they'll do is they'll land and they'll spend the day feeding, resting, and then they'll take off again at night to cross over to the islands. And the main migration routes, birds are actually, this picture on the left is what bird migration actually looks like on weather radar. This orange offshore of Florida, that's what rain looks like. But these big circles are birds, millions of birds flying through the radar beam. And there's Tampa, and there's Pensacola and Atlanta, and they're flying through the Jacksonville. They're flying through the radar beams, and there's so many of them that they're showing up as green on the radar. And they have a wide front across the whole, this is on a really good night. We probably a front to come through. The winds are out of northwest. They've got a tailwind. It's middle September. Lots of birds on the move. That's what it looks like. And this is at night. But they do kind of follow flyways. People talk about flyways, because birds that are in one area tend to be going to in between here to there. Birds in the central Gulf are often coming from all over. And obviously, you have a whole western migration that's going on out there. And we are definitely on the Atlantic Flyway because our recovery data, the recoveries are birds that either other people have banded and we capture, or our birds get recaptured by somebody else, either another bander, or they get found dead. Maybe they hit a window or something. Somebody notices the band on the leg. And back before there was satellite tracking, this was the only way that people kind of understood where individual birds went. There's lots of more sophisticated methods for doing this now, but they're all very expensive, where you put trackers on birds. Of the banding stations I've worked at, I've never worked at a station that has had more recoveries than this one, Cape Florida. And that's, I think, because there's a lot of banding effort in the Northeast, and they really are following the Atlantic Flyway. So we have birds coming through here are coming from the Northeast, Atlantic Canada, and then they're going all the way down to the islands. So it's exactly, we haven't had any turn up that are more in the Midwest. So we're really, this Atlantic coast is pretty, locations over here might pick up birds from there, but they really are going from here to here along the Atlantic Flyway. This dot down here on Puerto Rico, where there's a yellow dot and a red dot in the same spot, is kind of an interesting story. We banded a water thrush in 2013, and I find out that about these birds is the bird banding lab, the national lab, will send me a notice when somebody else has caught one of my birds, and also when we catch somebody else's bird, we report the number and can find out where that bird came from. And so one day in 2000, so we heard back from the bird banding lab in 2015 that they'd recaptured our water thrush in Puerto Rico, and that was our first record of a wintering bird, where one of our birds wintered. We suspected as much, but it's kind of neat to see the actual data. Now, it turned out it was a study. They're doing a study of wintering birds down there, and they caught our bird, but the same field season, winter 2015, spring 2016, they banded a prairie warbler. And fast forward 4 years, last fall, I pulled a prairie warbler out of the net, and it has a band. It's not mine. I reported it to the banding lab, and it is from the same project, the same season that they caught our bird. They banded one that then we caught years later. So that's when you think of the millions of birds migrating, the fact that we exchange birds it just amazes me that actually happened. And this is where they were spending the winter at Jobos Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve, which is on the south shore of Puerto Rico, and it's in mangrove habitat right on the coast, which makes sense when you think of where do we see prairies and northern water thrush around here. They're spending the winter. So how are these birds doing it? They're out at night, and these small little creatures are covering thousands of miles, and to make it even crazier, they're going from like their favorite territory that they breed on to they have a specific wintering territory, most of them. And so they're navigating, and they use a variety of methods. They use the stars and the sun, just like old seafarers do. They also know where magnetic north is. They have something in their head. I know a lot of research has been done on racing homers, but they have something in their head, iron or something, that they actually know where magnetic north is. They can sense it. They also will follow topographical landmarks, probably especially when they're zeroing in on their final territory. And they also orient themselves based on wind direction. Now, how do they do it physically? Well, they're carrying huge fat loads. Fat is their fuel. This is the red-eyed vireo again. The guys are going all the way to South America. And this is one of the things we're looking for when we're banding. This is the belly of a live bird. Their skin is translucent. This line down the middle is the breastbone. That's that big keel, like when you're eating a Thanksgiving turkey, that big flat bone you're left with. This is their muscle. And then you can see the fat as the yellow deposits. And these birds will put on like half again as much weight when they're migrating. They're these butter balls with their legs sticking out of this fat, and yet they're able to fly even with that added weight. And they fly 24, 36 hours nonstop if they have to. And their bodies make other changes. Their non-essential organs shrink, like their reproductive organs shrink down to almost nothing this time of year. Everything is about, their digestive system's still intact because they need to digest this food, and then everything, the cardiovascular is in top form. They have very efficient respiratory and circulatory systems. The birds have air sacs. Where humans, mammals breathe in, we breathe in, it's a dead end, and then the air goes back out. When birds breathe in and out, their air is moving in a circle through a whole series, through the lungs, and then a whole series of air sacs. So it's moving in a continual direction in a circle. It doesn't back up like it does. And it's just incredibly efficient for the physical demands of flight. So what do birds need on the ground? Well, we call them stopover sites. These are like stops along the way. They can't migrate the whole, especially songbirds, they don't migrate. They'll cover as much ground as they can in one night, but they don't but they need places to stop along the way and refuel. Cape Florida is a really important refueling location because we're at the end of the line before a long ocean crossing. And birds kind of use stopover sites in three ways. They'll use it as what they call a fire escape, which is a place to land because storms are coming. They need to stop flying. A fire escape could be anything. You could be on a boat at sea, and all of a sudden, if there's bad weather, it'll be covered with warblers or something. And that's just, we need to land and wait this bad weather to go away, and then we can pick up our migration. So that's like the first use. Then the second would be kind of like more on the level of a convenience store, where it's like a small patch can be that, where a few birds can refuel. They can be for a day or two, and eat a little bit of fruit, eat a little bit of insects, and keep going. So that would be, I mean, even your backyard could be a convenience store for migrating bird if you have the right plants growing there. And a full service hotel is a bird can stay there for a long time. A bird just had a bad trip and is really emaciated, can be there for weeks to put back on the fat and the muscle that it's lost from the stress of migration, or birds can spend the winter there. And Cape Florida is a full service hotel for a lot of species, especially ovenbirds. It kind of varies by species. There are some species that prefer not to be at Cape Florida, so they use it as a fire escape or a convenience store. The species that we catch the most of are using it as a full service. Also, individuals are different. Some individuals want to head to the island. Some are coming here for the winter. But Cape Florida, the restored habitat, is a full service hotel for them. So back to our banding. This spring, this is our first spring that we've done in a lot of years. I think we last banded spring of 2014. We were open 64 days from March through May, and we banded in that time 964 birds of 33 species. So it ended up being, when you consider our netting effort, to compare different seasons where I have more or less nets set up and we might be open, weeks longer than others, we divide how many birds caught by how many nets we had open, how long. So we measure birds by net hour, and this was the slowest spring by birds per net hour of all the 6 springs we've done. I think local birders can vouch for it was an unusually slow spring. We did have one day, April 22nd, where we caught 142 birds of 14 species in one day. That was kind of the highlight. What looked like was happening was that we just had really large scale easterly winds, like the high pressure, the Atlantic high was kind of over us. And it wasn't just here, it was statewide. Talking to other people around the state, it just wasn't that interesting a spring. When I checked the national radar, you could see a lot of birds in spring migrate more to the west anyways, but they really were pushed to the west. Despite that, we still caught interesting stuff. This mourning warbler was our first ever spring capture. It's a very rare bird in spring. It's also rare in fall, but it's super rare in spring. That was a surprise. A closely related Connecticut warbler, we usually do catch a few in the spring, but we only caught one this spring. We should have caught, 5 or 6. And here's 2 species that we catch in spring that are fun because their plumage in spring is very different from their fall plumage. We had 3 indigo buntings in fall. They're brown, kind of just an even warm brown. But in spring, the males have this gorgeous turquoise with kind of a purplish head plumage. This is a young male, so he's not as perfectly blue as the adults, but it's gorgeous. And then blackpoll warblers in spring have this really snappy black cap plumage, the males do. And that was a species that was missing. We usually catch 50, 60, 70 of them every spring. And we caught 9 this spring. It was just the weirdest thing. They either went over us because the winds were out of the east to southeast a lot. So birds may have gone over us and without landing, or they may not even have been flying through this region. And we just started fall 2021 on August 15th. In that time, as of yesterday, we had caught 70 birds of 15 species. It's about off to an average start. Until 2 days ago, we hadn't had a drop of rain to put them down, and the winds have just been out of the east. So Cape Florida does best on a northwest or west wind, because that kind of pushes the birds out over the ocean and to the east coast. Our highlights so far are this beautiful prothonotary warbler. We've also caught a chuck-will's widow, common ground dove, 3 Louisiana water thrush, which is about the most we ever catch. Louisiana water thrush is a super early migration. When we open on August 15th, they're mostly done migrating. We start seeing them around in July. And our #1 species so far is our 16 ovenbirds. Ovenbirds are a real common September migrant. The black-throated blues will often overtake them in numbers, total numbers, but not until October. There's a few coming through now, but they really pick up the pace later in the season. So here's a little bit of our species diversity. We don't just catch songbirds. Sometimes we catch raptors, like this broadwing hawk. Usually we catch sharp-shinned and Cooper's hawk, because they're in the woods hunting songbirds. Most raptors are up over the canopy, but every now and then a broadwing or red shoaler will duck into the woods and end up in our nets. Our nets are really set for small birds, so large birds often escape. Every now and again, though, a white-crowned pigeon will stick, and it's kind of neat to see them in the hand. It's been a while since we've caught one. And we catch some weird species. Chuck-will's widow, it's like Pac-Man. That big old mouth, like with the mouth closed, it looks like it's got this tiny beak, and then it opens up, and it's huge. And they fly around in the dark and grab whatever will fit in their mouth. We caught one year that had a northern water thrush halfway down its throat. It couldn't swallow it completely. The tail and the legs were sticking out of its mouth. That's a big mouthful. I was impressed. And it tried to eat a water thrush. In the beginning, early days, we caught ruby-throated hummingbirds, like 1 or 2. I don't have a permit to ban hummingbirds. You need a special permit. And since the woods, in the last 20 years, I've been there long enough to watch the woods, really, the canopy's gone a lot higher and have grown in. And for some reason, we don't catch them anymore. That's a neat bird to see in the hand. This is so different. And we catch birds with attitude, like great crested flycatchers. They have attitude in the hands. They have attitude flying around the woods. Wide-eyed vireo with their crazy eyes. They're like, I just love them. And then we catch blue jays, which have a lot of attitude when they're out and about, but are surprisingly docile when they're in the hand. It's almost like they're very smart, and they know that you're big and you have them. And so rather than fight you, they try the opposite route of, let me make big sad eyes, and maybe you'll let me go. Show mercy on me, please. And cardinals with that big beak, it hurts when they bite. We also catch thrushes. This is a wood thrush, which is actually the rarest of the thrushes we catch. We catch a lot more Swainsons and gray cheeks. But I don't know, wood thrush, they're special to me. They're a little bit larger, and they got those perfect round spots, but all the thrushes are beautiful. We don't catch that many sparrows down here. We have caught a grasshopper sparrow. It is completely the wrong habitat for them, but these birds are migrating and make mistakes. They put down anywhere. This would have been a fire escape for a grasshopper sparrow. It is not their 5-star hotel. He probably left, and as soon as we abandoned him, he probably just left and, found a field somewhere. And we catch tanagers. This is a summer tanager, which is red year round, the male. The scarlet tanagers that we have, they are red with black wings in the spring, and they're green with black wings in the fall. Female both are green. summer tender females, more yellow green. Catch red-bellied woodpeckers. These aren't migrants, they're residents. This is a young bird, kind of in a molt, a little bit scruffy looking. Probably catch a couple of those a year. And everybody's favorite feeder bird, painted bunnings. We catch a lot of those. And we have a few return year after year. And rose-breasted grosbeak. These last two species are related to cardinals. They also have huge beaks. We only catch 1 or 2 rose-breasted a year, and they also chomp. And mostly we catch warblers. I showed you pictures of our more common warblers earlier. This is some of the stuff we call frosting. A lot of these birds are actually going to Central America to spend the winter. So not that many move through South Florida. They're probably leaving the Florida Panhandle and crossing the Gulf, or maybe going down west coast of Florida and then dropping over. So we usually only catch stuff like these guys on a west wind, or there's, everybody gets excited about these because there's not that many. Blackburnians are gorgeous. Cerulean warblers, a very early migrant. They're getting rarer and rarer. This is the perfect time of year to see a cerulean. Somebody will probably see one this week somewhere in Dade County if we're lucky. We haven't caught one for a few years. We've caught maybe 10 in 20 years. So they're always really special every day. From now until like the first week of September, we'll be like, come on, cerulean. But we haven't caught one yet. And Wilson's warbler, very common western bird. There's always a smattering of them that get into our area, and sometimes they spend the winter. These are sought after on Chris's bird counts. We also catch prothonotarians. We always catch a few of those, maybe half dozen a year. Like we caught 2 so far. Chestnut-sided is another regular bird that's not really using our flyway that much. They're trying to get to Central America. Swainson's warbler is a weird bird. Probably most of the Swainson's warblers migrate through South Florida. This is one of the only places I've been where you can actually see a lot of Swainson's warblers, relatively speaking. They're very cool. They're more drab, but they're really cool behavior. Big spike-like bill. They vibrate while they're foraging on the ground. And hooded warblers. Hoodeds and prothonotarians are southern nesters, and they're heading probably mostly towards like the Yucatan and stuff, but we get a few of those every year too. It's just this nice hit of yellow. They just glow. And here's some more GoldWinged Warblers. Are just pretty scarce anywhere. We caught one this spring. We catch maybe one every year or every other year. Closely related blue-winged warbler is a regular. We have them every year, at least 1 or 2. And yellow-throated warbler is a very common bird. They're winter here, and they come to my bird bath in my yard, but you don't really see big flocks of them. And so we only catch 1 or 2 a year, even though it's a very common wintering bird in South Florida. So that kind of wraps up my talk about what we catch. And we are right now doing an Adopt-A-Net fundraiser for the banding station. All the proceeds go to Cape Florida. And what you get for your donation is you get we're going to put a sign on your adopted net. And I'll take you a picture, give you a little text, send you an email with which net you have. And at the end of the season, we're going to do a report. I'm going to give you a report, both general report on how the season went, but also the birds that your net caught. And $1,000 donors will also receive a small, like maybe 9x12 original watercolor that I'll do for them of either an interesting bird we catch this fall, or if you have a special request. So.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. Wonderful information. And yes, for those of you who want to support this project or already haven't done that, I see on the attendees that several of you have actually already supported the project. We welcome you to joined this effort through Adopt-A-Net, and Anna will has already dropped the link in the chat. And now Brian is gonna have a conversation with Michelle before we take your questions regarding the process of bird banding and migration. Go ahead, Brian.
Good evening, everyone. So yes, there have been a few questions that the audience has been asking. So I'll cover those questions first. Joe Desant is asking, is there a species list for the area? So I'm assuming that by that she means a list for Billbags Cape Florida State Park. So is the state park still keeping a bird list just for the park, or would you just have to go to eBird to get a list for the park?
I know they had a list, especially when Robin lived here. I don't know how to access it. I could find out. I probably have to ask Liz Golden. I'm sure she's got it. I don't know if there's a link to it. I know some places, like Guy Tortugas have an actual pamphlet or something with the species list. I'm not sure what form the species list is for Cape Florida. I don't think there's an actual pamphlet at this point. I'd have to ask Liz about that.
Okay, thank you. Next question is from one of our brand new task field trip leaders, Joe Montes de Oca. He finds the stopover names that you used funny, things like fire escape and convenience store and full service hotel. So he's wondering, did you just come up with those names yourself, or are those standardized names that are used at all the banding stations?
No, those names came from a paper that came out, I think in 2005, from a lot of the people that I used to work with on the Gulf Coast. And they were just trying to come up with a way to describe stopover habitat that like the general public could. They were talking about the different levels that birds use stopover habitat, and they were kind of using phrases that the public could kind of understand. Just for areas, just for conservation purposes, you're just trying to talk about the different levels that habitat can provide for.
Okay, good. Amy Creek is asking if you ever get bitten by the birds. You've already mentioned getting bitten by cardinals and grosbeaks, but do you have any other bird bite stories?
The little birds try to bite, like worm-eating warblers are vicious, but doesn't hurt. The worst I've had was a red-shouldered hawk that grabbed my thumb, and it didn't puncture this talons, but it just put the crushing force of its grip on my thumb, and it hurt for like 2 days, like somebody hit it with a hammer. But most of them, it's not that bad. A little pinch here and there.
Okay, thanks. Donna Moraine is asking, could you talk more about which species are using the Atlantic Flyway, but flying over billbags, so you never ban them? I guess that's what she's asking.
Swallows, kingbirds. There's a lot of open habitat species and aerial species that go over that we don't catch. Common nighthawks are going over us. Swallows is probably the largest group that we don't catch to go over by, and also a lot of the hawks, a lot of the more open air hawks. Like we've only caught a couple of broadwings. Peregrine falcons are moving through. Yeah, those guys go right over us and don't stop. We don't catch them. I mean, they might stop. Well, swallows don't really stop. They just keep going.
Okay, good. Let me ask a couple of questions, kind of in the same vein of what Donna was asking. Well, you talked about the mourning warbler being unexpected. I guess, what, only one mourning warbler you've ever banded at the banding station, or more than one?
Just in spring. We catch a few in the fall.
Okay.
But not every year. It's like every couple of years we might catch one.
Okay, but so you said that was unexpected, but is it the most unexpected of all the species that you've captured?
No, our most unexpected species was the ruddy quail dove. It's only the 5th one ever seen in the United States, and it turned up just in our nets at random. That was very unexpected.
And didn't you actually recapture that once or twice after you banded it?
Yeah, I think we captured it once, and she hung out in the banding area. We had to keep it under wraps from the birders because they would have invaded. But then when we closed the nets for the season, we let people know. And I think that bird hung out, I think maybe into November.
Wow. And then is there any species that you would have thought by now you would have banded at Cape Florida, but you never have up to this point?
Of vagrants, I am surprised we've never caught a Western Spindalis. We've caught so many other of the Caribbean vagrants, and Western Spindalis, people see them every year somewhere. We've had them over nets, and just the fact that we haven't caught one in 20 years is kind of weird. As for regular occurring North American species, warbling vireo, we've caught something like 7 or 8 species of vireos. We've yet to catch a warbling vireo. So that's kind of weird too. They're also pretty rare here, but so are some of the other vireos we've caught.
Okay. Jacob Zide is asking, how does someone volunteer to assist at the banding station?
We have, going back to having to learn how to take the birds out of nets, we have a kind of a pretty rigorous program of volunteer commitment. We require 1 day a week for a whole season, kind of a minimum. And that's because of all the steps it takes to learn how to hold birds, how to take them out of the nets and become useful volunteer. And if you're interested in making that commitment, just contact. You can contact me at Tropical Audubon, or I have a blog too that we didn't. You can link to our blog through Tropical Audubon site, and we actually our slots are full for fall. But if you're interested, I would say contact me maybe in February of next year when we're starting to get together for the spring. It's kind of a first come, first serve. We may have other volunteer opportunities in the future though, but right now the main banding station, yeah, we're full for the fall. So contact me in the spring, and we can see if we can, with your schedule, our schedule, and basically starting the beginning, you'll just get trained. And best thing to do is visit, see if it's something you want to do. It's very early in the morning, and then if it's something you want to do, then we'll just start the training process at the beginning of one of the field seasons.
Okay, thanks for that information. There are a few more questions. We'll see how many we can get through. Tilke Lopez Blanco is asking, have you ever caught any parrots?
Nope.
Okay, that was easy. Robert Warren asked, did Cape Florida give much support to migrants when it was dominated by the Australian pines? So how much do you know about pre-Andrew?
What I hear, like from Robin and the old timers, you might be able to help me out too. I think, and from what I've seen with Australian pines and other places, like they're physical trees, so birds will sit in them, they'll use them. I think Robin said there is an area though that was native that was the hot birding spot pre-Andrew, but they'll use the trees, the structure, but I don't think there's a whole lot of foraging for them. You know, there's no fruit. I've never been big enough to like have a control site, maybe on Virginia Key, where it's full or it's just Australian pine and compare, you know, bird condition. You know, that would, or I don't have a time machine to go back pre-Andrew to Cape Florida. So I'm just kind of guessing that just, you know, it's hard to imagine just looking at the structure and habitat that it was as good for migrants as it is now, given what I see them eating and how I see them behaving. When I see the pictures of that understory that's just pine needles and then just the tall without the mid-story, without low shrubs, it's hard to imagine it being as high quality habitat.
Yeah, what people have told me is that pre-Andrew, the migrants were easier to see, but they didn't stay very long.
That makes sense. They were probably using it as a fire escape.
Exactly.
They put down when they had to, but they wouldn't stick around. That sounds about right.
Okay, good. Gary Hunt is asking, the photos show the nets look like they're about 8 feet tall. Do you hoist them up higher between trees to capture the higher flyers?
We had, prior to Irma, 2 canopy nets, which we hoisted up and down, and we're probably going to, now that the canopy is kind of coming back together a little bit better, we're probably going to put them back up to catch birds that are going over. So yeah, these nets catch kind of the low to mid-range birds, but you can set nets higher.
All right, good. Task President Joe Barros wants to know, are you seeing any trends that could be suggesting changes due to climate change?
That's a good, interesting, and big question. That's something that it would be really, really cool if like a researcher would take our database and because the way I collect data, it can be used by other researchers. It's kind of standardized techniques to try to get a handle on that. It's, from what I read in the literature, the more direct effects are more obvious further north where the birds have a tighter schedule and something is fruiting at a certain time. Because if climate change changes the fruiting of a certain bush or something that birds are dependent upon being all in fruit when they come through there, if climate change makes that happen sooner or later, birds need to adapt their migration. When they get down to our latitude, I think it's less obvious because like our #1 tree for birds is ficus. They fruit whenever they want. So it's harder to tell at our latitude the direct impact of climate change, but I would love for our data to be used because we have such a long data set. There's a lot of analysis you could do. You could also do timing, see if there's any significant changes in the timing of when migrants are arriving. So.
All right, good.
Yeah.
We have time for a couple more questions, Paola?
Yes, Brian.
Okay, good. J Mac is asking, is there a master list of all the birds that you've banded? So does the banding station website have that?
Yeah, it has it. I'm trying to think when I last updated. I do have on, I think I have it updated through fall 2020 on the website. In theory, yeah.
All right, let's do it. One more question. Donna Moraine is asking again, could you talk about the impact of the banding station? Have there been any papers that have been published by anyone at the banding station, including you, obviously? Are there any volunteers that have gone on to become banders at other banding stations? And do you have any partnerships with any other banding stations?
So the easy question first, a lot of our alumni have gone on to work on other projects, and especially the ones that are kind of younger, as an undergrad, they come through. Some people in high school banded, will work with me and have gone on to work at other stations or go to school. We want and welcome collaborations with researchers. We've had some in the past. That was how we were able to be open for spring some of the previous years. We were working with a gentleman from University of Maine who was looking at mercury levels in birds, as well as some other things. And so he collaborated with us to run the station in the spring. We would like to develop more research relationships. I personally, when I look at all this data, I'm like, I don't have the time to do much with it. I really, really need to find somebody. Most recently, somebody who was doing a paper on blackpoll warblers across all of the Western Hemisphere used some of our data. I had a call for data, and so I said, yeah, I've got blackpoll data for 15 years worth. Here you go. So data sharing, and that's one of the things that we're going to work on. Right now, we're kind of have some things that are happening on the educational side, but we'd like to also promote the banding station as a research partnership. with various universities so that we can have people that have the time to know how to really get into the data.
If I can add to that, Brian, one of the reasons, among others, that Tropical Audubon really wanted to work very closely with Michelle and the banding station, and if you think that the banding station has produced 20 years of data, and of course, we certainly have 20 years of climate data, we are really excited to look for partnership with universities and professors and researchers that take that data and answer that question that Joe posed, which is critically important. You might recall that a National Audubon Society published a couple of years ago a report explaining the impact of climate change on birds. So we have here a prime location with prime data to be able to assess that for migratory songbirds in Florida. So that's something that we're really excited to kind of delve into in the future.
All right, I don't see any other questions, so I'd just like to thank everyone that did ask questions. And now I'll send it back to you, Paula. Thanks, Michelle.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for attending. It was very insightful, Michelle. Thank you for that. Please continue to support us. We loved having you here. Any questions, feel free to write to our emails that we shared on the screen previously. And we look forward to seeing you again in one of these webinars. And have a good evening. Bye.
Bye, everyone.